And then what would be possible if we put no constraints on ourselves? Often we put a lot of self-limiting constraints. Hi, I wanted to create this video today, a quick one about innovation. Last week I led a conference session about marketing and innovation coming out of COVID-19. And as I was going through the preparation around the subject, a lot of things started coming together about how I do my coaching, how, when I coach clients, businesses, or individuals. And one of the things that always comes up is about their next steps or how they innovate. So what I brought together is some thoughts on that. And I just wanted to share them. There's a deck that's going to be up on my website at www.bushongmedia.com under the resources tab. I recommend you go and take a look at it. Download it, use it for as you want. When you're thinking about innovation, the first thing is change is really needed. Some of you may have heard of a luminary called Marshall Goldsmith. He wrote a book. It was a New York Times bestseller. But the title of the book was "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." And if you think about it, a lot of us in our lives, in our careers, our companies, what got us to where we are isn't necessarily what we're going to use in order to get to the next step, to get to that next level, to get to that next market, to get to that next breakthrough that we're going to. So that was one thing that had come to mind, Marshall's book. And then the other one was a quote from Einstein. And again, I'm going to be sort of just paraphrasing it. But it's like, we can't solve the problems of today with the same thinking that created them. Okay? So if you think about it, we really need to change up our mind processes if we're going to change what we've created. So it's two things that really to keep in mind that have spurred me. Another thing I came across, I was listening to a podcast. David Briss was on the podcast. I think it was Marketing Prof's podcast, and David Briss was there. And David Briss, I believe he lives in the UK. He really writes a lot about and consults a lot on creativity and how to increase your creativity. And he talks about the sort of the four modes of our mind. And so the first one is, feeding the mind. So how are we getting those inputs? How are we taking information in? How are we getting stimulus that's actually going to impact the way we think? The next mode is about resting the mind. It's something that, resting the mind is something we might not do enough of. We talk about sleep and the importance of sleep, but there are times when we just need to have our mind be calm and be still to allow the neurons and the synapses to connect, which will then lead to new types of, pathways being followed and the potential for innovation. So think about that. And it's through sleep, through meditation, through calm. The third mode was exercising the mind. That's where we are actively engaged in something that is stimulating our mind. It might be our work, might be our hobbies. It's really that learning moment. So it's not just the data coming in, it's that learning moment. It's active. And then he talks about the last one where we're just occupying our mind and see how much of our mind, time we give our mind takes up this. This is where something is just like washing over us. It's not nourishing. We're not really resting, and it's not active stimulation to sort of build that muscle. We're not exercising. So there are those four modes, and one of the questions I ask is, what are we doing for each of those modes? What are we doing to give our mind, to feed our mind a nice balance of information, of data that comes in, so that we're feeding it healthily? How are we resting our mind? Personally, I don't get a lot of sleep, but I do meditate. And I find these calm moments where I can just think about nothing and my mind sort of makes connections in those moments. Exercising, how do you do ongoing learning? Personally, I'm a lifelong learner. I love reading books, love watching podcasts, love TED Talks. So what are we doing to exercise our mind? I'm a photographer, videographer, so I do a lot of things. I have hobbies that I also use that help stimulate and I learn about because I'm interested and excited by. So what are those things that we're doing? And then how do we limit that just occupying our mind, which is just that we're there and there's nothing, it's not really rest, but there's this sort of dull stimulus that's coming over us. So what can we do for each of those modes? And then during the conference, I talked about different ways of coming up with new ideas and thinking about innovation. I talked about design thinking and some of the work that was pioneered by IDEO. And if you think about their process, and I recommend you go online and you look up IDEO design thinking. The first part is it's called empathize, and by empathize, it's really about putting yourself in the place of the person you're going to be innovating or doing something for. I know we often think of empathy in leadership, but you can think of empathy in terms of putting yourself in your customer's shoes, putting yourself in your customer stakeholder shoes or your stakeholder shoes as well. So talked about that, talked about a couple of other sort of inspired techniques that I received through my training I had with What If, which is a creativity innovation consultancy. And again, this is available at my website at www.bushongmedia.com. Download it, take a look at it. And really then, if you want to dive deeper, go online and find information, reach out to those companies. After going through, thinking about different techniques to use to help stimulate innovation and creative thinking, I started talking about really thinking about the sort of my coaching practice and how when I work with clients, either individuals or teams, companies, to help them think differently about their future, okay, to innovate for their next steps. Started thinking about how we apply that. And I first started by thinking about the different dimensions that we can innovate in. So a lot of times we think firstly about, okay, my product or service. That's what I can innovate. Well, I put forward that we can think about, so it's multiple dimensions. We can think about our customer, our target, our segment, subsegments. How do we innovate and think about those dimensions differently? And how can we creatively think about how we bring together segments or formulate segments to actually position a product for them? Our product or service, getting beyond just what are the elements of a given product or service we have, how can we bundle? How can we bring things together? Twist the product or service, but then how can we add to it? What are the things that our customers or our stakeholders are looking for that we can add to what we normally do and actually come up with something new for them? How do we promote? How do we engage our audience? How do we engage our customer? How do we think about communicating with them and get an interaction coming back and forth? Think about our internal processes. If we're in a company, how do we go about, how do we set up a marketing campaign? Are there things we can do in that process or in the process we use to make content or to distribute content or distribute our product or how we're supporting our customer? Are there things that we can do there to innovate, to actually bring newness and freshness and maybe get ahead of the curve to beat out some of our competitors? How are we organized? So this is an area you think about how we get work done is often related to how the business is organized. Often we have an organization and we adapt our processes to the organization, but then how do we think about that interaction between the two of them, the organization and the process? And if we were to organize differently, even if it's temporary organization, tiger teams, skunk works, things like that, how can we organize for innovation? And then how can we organize to maybe innovate for our consumer? Maybe we have a different approach to taking our product out. Maybe we have a different approach to supporting our consumer. The workplace, again, we were talking a lot about COVID in this conference because it was in the COVID time. And how can we innovate the workplace? How can we make it so it's creates greater flow? When COVID came rapidly, my team, we had to activate to get everybody out of the office, but allow them and create infrastructure, technologies, and processes so that people could still work, but do it remotely. where previously it was we always had to be in the office and we could never imagine that we could get the work done remotely. And in a matter of weeks, we actually twisted all of that, turned it on its head, and had almost 100% of our team working remotely. What are the policies that we have in place as companies, as departments to support innovation and creative thinking? And then something that's really important, and a lot of people I don't think do this enough, holding up a mirror to ourselves as leaders, as individuals. What can we do? How can we innovate ourselves to bring greater value to our teams, to our stakeholders, to our consumers? And what can we do to encourage and create a space for innovation and creativity? So something to think about. What's the culture that we have there? And then for the people on our teams, ourselves as well, what are do we have the right people? How do we take the teams that we had that were used to doing things one way, and how do we upskill them? How do we give them what they need to be successful as we go forward? And then how can we think about the work that we're doing, and are there things that are the lower skilled, more administrative stuff that we can automate, freeing up time and space to create and innovate? Automate so we can innovate. Hashtag trademark. So then we wrap the session with talking about coaching for innovation and what I do with clients and what I do with different, whether individuals or teams of people. The first thing is asking a question, and it's really a whole series of questions to go through. And I, again, encourage you to download this material, use it, adapt it for your own needs. One, being clear about what are we trying to solve for? Let's ask ourselves that question. What are we trying to solve for? Then once we write that down, just ask ourselves, and what else? Because often our first response, our first answer, isn't going to be complete. It's not going to be the whole thing. So what we need to do is think about, go a little bit further. And when I ask a question and somebody gives a response, I almost always ask, and what else? What else is there? When you're thinking about innovation as a marketer, as somebody in research and development, engineering, across the enterprise, even in yourself, though, when I think about it is, what do our customers really want? Not, our product does this, and we have these products, so to define it that way, but really to use that empathy muscle, put ourselves in our customer's place. What do our customers really want? And then if they had no constraints, what would they really want? And then ask that question again, and what else? Think about that, and what else? Maybe that leads to some bundling that we can do, makes us think differently about what they're asking for. But if our customers had no constraints, what would they really want? And then going beyond our customers, thinking more systemically about things, what do our customers' stakeholders want? And then what do their stakeholders want? What do the customers' communities want? So think larger, think more systemically about all the impacts, the places that our products or our services touch, and then how they're used after that, to think about what's there. Are there opportunities there? And as you probe that, always ask yourself that question, and what else? And then what comes and what opens up if we suspend the judgment? We have all these filters when we get an input, somebody says something, somebody says an idea, we're looking at the marketplace. We have all these filters that are often built upon our successes from the past, the experiences we have from the past. What if we were to twist those? What if we were to take those away? Okay, what then comes up for us? What are those opportunities? And then what would be possible if we put no constraints on ourselves? Often we put a lot of self-limiting constraints. We convince ourselves that they're coming from someplace else and that they're real. But often, if we really think about it, a lot of the constraints that we work within, that we put out there, that we put them on ourselves. So what would be possible if we had no constraints? Then, the last question I talked about was, what would be different if instead of being rewarded for success, we were rewarded for failure, for trying things and failing. That we were not paid to succeed, we were paid to try things and fail. What would that look like? What would come up from those trials? What kind of fearlessness and courageousness would we approach innovation, new products, if we had that mindset? Some companies do. A lot of the smaller startups that I work with, that's what they do. They have that mindset. They think, hey, look, we got nothing to lose. Let's try. And so they're out there experimenting. What would happen for us if we experimented, one, with our companies, on our markets and things like that, but what also would be available to us if we were courageous about our own selves and we thought for a moment, I'm going to be rewarded for trying, even if I fail, or really to push myself to fail, to be courageous enough to get out there and fail. So again, probably went longer than I wanted to, but I just had these thoughts about innovation coming from the conference that I was part of last week. I just wanted to share some of these thoughts, put them out there. If you have ideas, share them below with your comments. Appreciate it. I'm going to put this on LinkedIn. I'll also put this on our YouTube channel, Next Steps. Engage there. There's a lot of great content up there to look at. Go to my website, bushongmedia.com, www.bushongmedia.com. Resource tabs, download the presentation, see what's there. This is all available for you. And if you want to engage further, please let's have the conversation and let's keep the conversation going.